And they're unable to rebuild because for one thing, there are sanctions. Iran can't export its goods and it can't import anything. So money is very tight. At the same time, while they're not able to rebuild the communities and the schools and get medicine to those needy, even food and clothing, at the same time, Iran is being threatened with war. And this is a game that's often been played by the United States, is they push to the point where you choose guns over butter. So in other words, because there's limited amount of money there and Iran feels that it's going to be attacked, it's spending more of its income on defensive forces or offensive, depending on how you look at it. But anyway, it's spending more money on its military instead of heating the population, which is what the aim of the sanctions is in a very dire humanitarian crisis, as outlined in 2009 by Brookings. So the hope is that the people, before they die, they turn on their government. And this may have worked well had it not been for Mr. Trump pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. Mr. Trump showed to the Iranians, President Trump, that the United States is a very unreliable international player and it doesn't hold up its promises, its treaties are meaningless, and what the president says or does is meaningless. So even with all the pressure that's being put on Iran because of the sanctions, they're not willing to come to the table to negotiate or renegotiate. They never left the table, as the foreign minister likes to say America did. They're not willing to negotiate again. And they've reached a point, and I observed this in Iran, and at the time when I was there about 2-3 months ago, and it's even worse now, that they're willing to die to the last Iranian because they know that's their only salvation. They know that they can't rely on having another deal made with the United States because, well, come today, the deal may last for 2 years, and then Trump may or may not be in office. The next president says, no, I want another deal. And basically, they want Iran to buckle. And Iran is super important geopolitically for America's global hegemony, which it has not abandoned. So the United States wants to bring Iran to its knees, and Iran is not willing to go on its knees. It's saying at this point, I would rather die standing. Now, I mean, if let's put aside all compassion for the Iranian people. Let's say, because for the past 40 years, everything the media has been telling Americans and the Western world in general, that they're Muslims. I mean, Islam has become a dirty word in our dictionary. That they're terrorists, that they support terrorists, and they want to build a nuclear bomb and what have you. Although I'm sure all in this room, especially those who are with Veterans for Peace, would know that Iran helped fight terrorists in the region, and even America acknowledged it as such. But terrorism, I guess, is a matter of perspective. But even if you put aside all compassion for humanity, put aside all compassion for a child who's crying from hunger, as they are doing in Yemen, or a child dying from cancer, as they are in Iran, put that aside, we've put Iran in a position where the sanctions are so horrendous that to them it's tantamount to war. I mean, both cases are a bad case scenario for Iran. And the thought is, and it was very interesting to hear this. I heard it on June 2nd by somebody who himself is a professor of international relations in Iran, but he also has a think tank in Iran, and they advise the Iranian military. He was saying that if we're all going to die through sanctions, if the country is going to be destroyed through sanctions, then we're going to fight back. So what's happened, what America has done with its, and which is why we see a lot more, in a sense, Iran many years ago, even up until a year ago, it was trying to react to American actions. And then it raised the bar because it wasn't getting anywhere. And it was, as America acted, Iran would start taking steps. Now it's reached a point that it feels that it needs to take preemptive action. And again, as I said, put aside the cost of, the Iranian lives aside, if God forbid, there should be an all-out war with the United States, it would not be limited to Iran and the United States. The first thing they said, and this is what this chap was saying, this professor and the advisor of the military, the first thing they would do, aside from blocking the Strait of Hormuz, which would stop the flow of oil to Europe, Japan, and Asia. And by the way, China, being an ally of Iran, has tankerfuls of fuel waiting at its ports to be taken into China. So they're set. So if there is a full-out war, the countries in the region will all be subjected to attack. And that includes U.S. military personnel. It includes the Arab allies, the United Arab Emirates. It would be a piece of cake to take them out with a single missile. It would be Saudi Arabia. There would be attacks on Israel, all the countries that America cares for, yet they're going ahead with this precarious way of demanding subjugation from a sovereign nation at a cost that nobody can even imagine. Again, if you go back to the 16-year war that we had with Vietnam, I mean, they think that Trump thinks that the war is going to be short. It will not be. We were in Vietnam for 16 years. We use the same B-52 bombers that they're threatening Iran with. And so while they may destroy the country, they won't get away scot-free. I mean, there will be so much damage to the world. And, you know, there was a time, and I'm sure you all hear this on the media, there was a time where military power, the number of soldiers, the number of tank, you know, warships, the number of, at that time was F-14s, now F-35s, F-22s, meant something. It was a reflection of your power. But the world has changed to a point where armies can almost be on par if they have access to electronics, if they can hack, if they can destroy via the internet. And this is something that we need to take into account. I mean, Iran, of course, does not have the same might as the United States or Israel or Britain, but its cyber activity is formidable. And if we care about our country, if we care about America, being an Iranian American, I care about both countries. If we care about lives, we have to put a stop to this madness. But the madness is just not a question of stopping a war. It's also the putting a stop to the sanctions that are leading to war. And, you know, we've seen examples of this happening. Now, I mean, I'm sure that you all keep up with the news these days about, you know, today's news was that Iran had broken spies, a ring of spies, CIA spies in Iran. And I can assure you for a fact, I don't know if truly they have captured 17, but I know for a fact there are CIA spies in Iran. I do know they recruit them. A very affluent friend of mine, I wrote about the family in my article for Wham. He had gone to Dubai. He was educated here in America, always had fond memories of America. He went to Dubai for a multi-entry visa to the United States. And the consulate invited him for coffee and wanted to use him as a spy. So he declined the multi-entry visa, and he declined to come to the United States, and he declined to become a spy. Now, he was smart enough to do that. A lot of people are attracted for various reasons to get a visa, to get money. I mean, gosh, if your child is dying from cancer or from some other disease, you would do anything in the world to save that child. So if that person is offered a job, say with the CIA, I wonder what I would do. I really don't know if I would turn them down. So for sure, I know that they are recruiting amongst Iranians, but the intelligence is so strong, they caught them. And again, we're putting Iranians in harm's way, we're putting Americans in harm's way, and everybody else, because for America, that's now the only superpower in the world. But at that time, you know, it was America and the Soviet Union. It was inconceivable that a third world country with a population of just over 35 million, it was 36 million at the time, the ruler of the country was America's client, the Shah. and Iran was basically a consumer market where America would unload its goods, had the audacity to successfully kick out the Shah and kick out America. And so that's been very, very difficult for America to embrace and accept. And what is always afraid of with when they talk about Iran's influence, say in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, it's not because they're afraid of a confrontation, one-on-one confrontation with Iran. They're afraid that Iran may have the same influence on them, and that they would rebel against the rulers, and they would force the rulers not to work with America, not to be subservient, and to be independent. And that's been a huge fear of America's, and it's never gotten over the fact that Iran managed to do this, and is constantly looking for alternatives to the government in Iran. I mean, there's the Shah's son, there's the terrorist group that they nurture. Here we are telling Iranians that the biggest sponsor of terrorists, and we had terrorist groups living down the street from the White House, and they were on the State Department's foreign terrorist organizational list. So it's very easy to, unfortunately, it's become all too easy to mislead the American public. University, when I went to college, because I went back to college as an older student here in America, the professors felt comfortable speaking with me in private, and they directed me towards research. They taught me things that I would not have learned in a classroom. But the others, they were just taught everyday stuff. I mean, colleges and universities are no longer a place where you can have debates, where you can learn, where you can read about things that you don't hear on the news. It's the same books, the same doctrine. You're almost being indoctrinated. And the younger people really have no appetite in activism because much of the time they don't know any better. So we are left, the very few of us, and thank you, Mary, for the reminder about Margaret Mead. There are very few of us to do something we can, just the small group that we are. I think, people often say to me that, why do you write? Why do you speak? Why do you care? And do you really think you're going to make a difference? And my answer has always been, always, if I can at least share what I know with one person, then I'm happy, because I hope that one person will share it with somebody else. Because if we don't stop what's going on today, and especially with, Vietnam, what happened in Vietnam, so many of our soldiers died. They were, they had to join, they had no choice. It was a draft then. But so many of them were wasted. So many of them regretted it, the long years. And yet Vietnam was not geopolitically in a position where it could bring in much of the world, although it did the Vietnam War. Iraq was not in a geopolitical position where the war against Iraq would have affected the whole world. Syria, the same, but a war against Iran will affect almost every single country in the world. And many people predict, rightly, I think, that it would be World War III. And it would be such a heinous war. If it were just a question of nuclear weapons, like we dropped a couple of nuclear weapons at Japan, I don't say it this lightly. I think it was criminal. But we dropped a couple of nuclear weapons on Japan. Somewhere between 200 and 300,000 people died, and that was the end of it. That brought it to an end. In this day and age, I don't think even nuclear weapons are the answer. I think that we now have, even back then they had biological warfare and what have you. The one thing that scares me more than anything is cyber war. We don't know what cyber war is capable of. A week ago or 2 weeks ago, I think it was New York that was in a total blackout, and that was accidental. I know we've played with Russian grids, electrical grids, and just imagine if such a thing on a much bigger scenario happened all over the world. You don't need an army to do this. You need a cyber army. Cyber army, I'm not an expert. It could be 5, 10, 15, 20 people. Are we really prepared for that? Today's world has become so dependent on on communication, the likes of which we're having right now, the things like hospitals and even keeping an eye on our nuclear weapons and everything else depends on electricity, on cyber, on the internet. And if that were attacked, then there is no going back. I mean, then you would say the days when two bombs were dropped were the good old days. So I think this madness really, really needs to stop. How it can be stopped, aside from what you guys are doing and how you're educating other people and all your admirable activities, more than anything, we need to make people informed. And I make it very clear to anybody who would listen. It doesn't bother me if you hate an Iranian. That, you know, an Iranian might hate you. That's not the question. We can't take our dislike, our hatred, our misconception, our misinformation about a country we don't even know where it's situated, allow that to get us all killed or put us in a position where if there are any children or grandchildren alive, they will turn back and curse you and say, why didn't you stop it? I mean, I think not too many people even know about Iran and what it is today, what it's not, but it went from a population of 36 million at the time of the revolution 40 years ago to about 82, 83 right now. At that time, when it was an American client state, a very small percentage of the country was educated. A very small percentage was very rich, and a very small percentage were considered to be very modern. Everything was for the rich. Everything was for the people around the Shah and the affluent. When the revolution, and God knows how much they looked down at people who had the hijab, the Islamic headdress. When the revolution came into being, it's far from perfect. There's a lot of issues right now, but there is free education for every single Iranian right now. Even refugees get free education. Now, education is free up until university level. You get, depending whose figures you believe, there's 86 to 97% literacy rate, but college educated women far surpass the men. Again, perhaps because college is free. Now, aside from free colleges, there are also private colleges. And unlike America, where it's the private colleges that are better known, like Harvard and Stanford and what have you, in Iran, the public colleges are the better colleges. So they're very, very difficult to get into. Although they give you know, like if you're a vet's child, if you fought in the Iran-Iraq war, then your child or your relative will get priority to those private college, to those public colleges. And then even up until your master's and PhD, it's free. But what they do when you want to go for your master's is they encourage you to go to night classes and work during the day so that you have some money. And you know, there's free healthcare for everybody, although a lot of people choose to get their own healthcare, because like everywhere else, when it's private, it's better. And with the way the government is right now, with the little money it has, dispensable income that it has right now, I can't imagine healthcare being too good. But they do offer it to refugees. I mean, Iran has so many refugees from Afghanistan. First, they came after the Soviet invasion, then after the U.S. bombing in 2001. There are probably more Afghans in Iran than Iranians. That's exaggeration, but they are entitled to healthcare. There's subsidized housing. Everything about it is a fairly normal society. Someone asked me, could it be described as a socialist society? It could be, if I mean, in a sense, I think Islam, if it's practiced properly, a lot of places it's not. In Saudi Arabia, it's not. A lot of the Iranian, the clergy, they're corrupt and they're very affluent. But Islam in itself, the basis of it is brotherhood and equality. So just as like the Christians, I think we give a third of our incomes, or or Catholics do. You give money to the poor. So in Islam, you have to give money to the poor, and there are a lot of foundations that help with the less affluent, with the poor. And the only thing that's probably very different from here is the culture is such like that you never abandon a disabled child, you never abandon an old parent. So one thing that's very rare to see in Iran is old people's homes. I mean, it would be a shame. It would be considered a huge shame for children to abandon their parents and say, okay, we're going to put you in a home, in a nursing home. They often live with their children and they're well taken care of. And like any other country, like if you work for governmental organizations, you have pension for life. And if you happen to pass away, if you're a guy and you pass away, it goes to your wife. And if your wife dies and you have an unwed daughter, a single daughter, even if she's 60 at the time, she will receive your pension. So pensions are there, and private firms often offer pension as well. So it's from many instances, it's a very, very normal country, and it's the most educated the most educated ethnicity in America are considered to be Iranians. They all have their bachelor's or master's. They're very well educated, which is something they want in Iran. And it's I know this. I can go on and describe to you about what's happening with the nuclear technology. I can wait for your answers, for your questions, and answer in depth. But I know that ever since 1992, at that time it was still Benjamin Netanyahu, then we had Sharon and he came back. He had been shouting wolf, and he had been crying wolf rather, and he'd been saying that Iran is 6 months away from a bomb. This is as of 1992. And it's been the impression that Iran wants to build a nuclear bomb. Iran believes it's contrary to humanity, contrary to Islam to build a bomb. Now, a lot of people might say, okay, I think this is contrary to Christianity and we shouldn't do it, and they do it. So just because Iran, the government says it's contrary to our belief, we don't want a nuclear bomb, I'm not going to take the word at it. But I have heard an Iranian president turn around and say, America has 16,000 nuclear bombs. How many wars has it won? And plus the fact that it costs so much to maintain a nuclear warhead, to keep them and to bring them back and to build more and more and more. The amount is just inconceivable that anybody would want to go for a nuclear bomb. But as you can see from the case of North Korea, it certainly is a deterrent. I mean, if somebody has a bomb, even one bomb, you wouldn't want to attack them. So I don't believe Iran is interested in building a bomb. I could be wrong on that. I mean, nobody knows unless, it's the top government people would know that. But I do know they're very interested in nuclear power. I know they're very interested in nuclear medicine. And I know that, I don't know how many of you have relatives that have had an MRI in the past 6 months, or know somebody who's had an MRI. That's nuclear medicine. So what essentially America is saying is, and incidentally, I read some statistics. 1 in 3 people in the United States of America has benefited from nuclear medicine, and nuclear medicine comes in various shapes and forms. It could be radiation, it could be MRI, it could be many other things, nuclear isotopes and what have you. And half of Australians have benefited from nuclear medicine. So it's quite incredible when you think about it. And when they signed this deal, Iran was allowed to enrich uranium up to 3.67%, which is used for energy only. And it was supposed to enrich it to very small amounts. But it wasn't allowed to enrich uranium for medical purposes. And to this day, I don't know how Iran accepted that. To me, it's mind-boggling because there is a dire shortage of nuclear or medical isotopes, which has to be enriched up to 20%. In fact, I don't know if you remember, not long ago, a few years ago, in Canada, a lot of people standing in line, they couldn't get the cardiologists couldn't tend to their patients because they couldn't take images of the patient's hearts. Everybody was standing in line for MRI, and there was a backlog. And basically, the United States supplies Canada with highly enriched uranium, that's plutonium, which is against every international law. And they break it down into medical isotopes, which in itself creates a waste, so that people could benefit from medical isotopes and from nuclear medicine. Barbara Bush, I don't know if you know, but if you have hyperthyroidism, it can kill you, it can lead to death, and they couldn't cure her. The only thing that cured her was nuclear medicine. So what America is essentially saying is, we don't want Iran to have nuclear enriched uranium for its power plants, because it might enrich it further. We don't want to have it for medicine because it might go and build a bomb. In the meanwhile, they can all just sit and die. So, and that's why it's kind of unacceptable to many Iranians. And people who don't know about nuclear medicine, I happened to stumble upon it because I did research with a professor of nuclear science at USC. He had been to two of the most horrendous nuclear accidents. One was Chernobyl. He was an expert. He worked with the State Department. And another one, he went to Japan when they had their accidents. So he knows all about nuclear accidents and its dangers. But he also taught me about nuclear medicine. And so I did a directed research with him. He was my guide, and I did research with him. So I became well versed in nuclear, all the benefits of nuclear power, medicine, what have you. And of course, it has its downsides, which we've seen with the accidents that have happened. But you always put the cost and the benefit together, and you proceed from there. So these are the reasons Iranians are saying, okay, you didn't hold up the deal. You tell us that we can't enrich uranium. And the reason they did that, which is why Rand Paul is getting in the middle of this, which was very clever of him, he said under the deal, Iran was allowed to have 300 kilograms of low enriched uranium for its fuel reactors. Because of Mr. Trump's sanctions, Iran can't send anything above the 300 to the countries that were supposed to accept it. That includes Russia. So that means they would be de facto in violation of the nuclear deal because they can't send out the surplus. And so that was the whole reason. So if they can't send it out, that means they can't enrich it anymore. And that's Mr. Trump's clever way. I don't think Trump is that clever, his advisors. It's their clever way of reducing the enriched uranium to zero. So, if they can't have clean nuclear power, and nuclear power is very, very, it's not renewable, but it's considered clean energy. If they can't have it for their nuclear reactors to substitute for the oil, because the pollution from fossil fuels is horrendous. I think that when I did my research, and this is like 15 years ago, or maybe less than that, 17,000 people a year in Tehran died from the pollution that gave them heart attacks and what have you. So if they can't have, clean energy, and if they can't have nuclear medicine, and if they can't sell their oil, and if they can't live, if they're not entitled to life and health and taking care of their families just like any other human would want to do, then they're going to react. And when they react, it's not going to be pretty. So I don't know how much more I want to get into everything that's at the back of my mind that I would love to speak to you guys about. But if you wish, if you have questions, please bombard me with questions, and I'll try and answer them to the best I can, because that might be, I want to know what you want to know, and I want to see if I can answer them.
Well, thank you so much, Soraya. That was wonderful information. Now, audience questions?
Why don't we have to?
Oh.
Or we can. And I'll
Okay.
pass the basket for
You wanna do
postcards
that,
too,
Lisa?
sure. Keep the mic away from the speakers though.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
We are making a collection. We think this would be a good time.
So
Or
it,
keep
yeah,
our organization
just if you
going.
have a little bit to help the WAM Middle East Committee,
A lot of it.
keep going on.
Yeah, so we can keep doing things like this. Just that any bit will help. And then if people want, we're not gonna let you out the door unless you sign a postcard. No, I'm just kidding, but we would like you to. We will mail them for you. We'll put the stamp on. So everyone, please, this would be a good time to sign a postcard. It's on your chair, or not, it's on the chair next to you. We'll just take a few minutes here, I think. Let's see. Do we start some questions? Oh, Lauren. Yes.
Do I take the mic?
You just tell me and I will repeat it. We just have to do it
I
that
want
way.
to thank you for, I want to ask you to just continue the last point you were talking about nuclear medicine. And I thought that since President Trump pulled us out of the accord, that the Iranians were feeling free to exceed the limits. And so I wonder if I'm correct. Do they feel free to develop, enrich enough to go on with their nuclear medicine?
Maybe, can you hear?
I did, and I think Mr. Trump, I don't know why he would say anything like that. No, Iran is not allowed to enrich uranium. It has a sovereign right. Iran is a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's actually NNPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran signed it in 1968. And the first reactors that Iran had came from the United States. And the United States gave Iran its Tehran research reactor, which is for medicinal use, gave it plutonium, which is bomb grade, to break it down so they could use it for medical isotopes. But after the Iranian Revolution, they put a stop to all that. And they said that Iran cannot enrich uranium because if it enriches uranium, that means that it wants to build a bomb. But there is a big difference from going from nuclear enriched uranium for nuclear reactors for power generation to medicinal, which is under 20%, is usually 19.97. It has to be slightly under, to bomb grade nuclear, which is over 90%. And Trump has never said that Iran can enrich uranium for medicinal purpose. That's not even in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It's not even in the Iran deal. So maybe he doesn't understand what nuclear medicine is. But nuclear medicine is, I mean, let me give you one example of nuclear medicine. A very, very close friend of somebody very dear to me, about 20 years ago, she had breast cancer. And so there wasn't much MRI at the time, so they removed the whole breast and they removed a whole bunch of the lymph nodes. The friend, unfortunately, she got breast cancer again last year. And they did an MRI and they could see that it hadn't really gotten to the lymph nodes. But all the same, they injected her before surgery. I was there with her the whole time, except for I guess when you're in surgery, you're out of it. They inject with nuclear isotopes, medicinal isotopes. And the isotopes actually show if the tumor is going through towards which lymph nodes. So they can only take out the lymph nodes that need be taken out, not take out a whole bunch, which can cause a whole lot of other problems. So these are the things nuclear medicine does, and I'm sure Donald Trump has no clue what nuclear medicine is, and I'm sure I would bet that he doesn't even know to what percentage it needs to be enriched. So I think no, he certainly hasn't said that. Sorry to give you a long answer, but no, he has not.
I think, Gary, you're next.
Yes, if I heard the news today correctly, Trump was hosting the president of Pakistan. And they were making speeches, and it sounded like he's trying to hint that Pakistan will help the U.S. go to war against Iran. What is the relationship between Pakistan and Iran?
What is the relationship between Pakistan and Iran? I'm just going to repeat in case somebody here has, varying degrees of hearing, including myself.
I think the one thing that one learns in international relations, there's never any constant. Today's friends are tomorrow's enemies. Yesterday's enemies are today's friends. Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the United States used to be very active in Afghanistan, and they backed the people we now call terrorists, but we're negotiating with. They backed the Mujahideen and they backed the Taliban. And at one point, the former president of Pakistan, a couple of presidents ago, Mr. Musharraf, he actually said that Dick Cheney had given them money to send John Dollar terrorists to Iran to take out, some Iranian targets. And this was in the news. I mean, any of the things that I say, if ever you should want to link to it, I'm more than happy to provide it to you through Wham, through Mary, or whomever would like to take that responsibility. So that at one point, they did work together, very much so. And Pakistan is a pariah state, as is India, as is Israel. They have, and North Korea, they have not signed onto the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, but they all have nuclear bombs. And Pakistan receives a great deal of military aid from the United States. At the same time, Pakistan has been, Pakistan and India have been very hostile towards each other for decades. India and the United States are getting ever closer, and this alarms Pakistan. So Pakistan kind of leans more towards China. I know I'm going around the circle to explain this, but Pakistan and China are aligned. And because China and Iran are aligned, I doubt in a million years that Pakistan will take steps against Iran. I mean, aside from the fact that they're both Muslim nations, but I've come, when you talk about religion, after having studied US foreign policy for years and years around the world, especially the Middle East and especially Iran, I've come to realize that we talk about the religion of a country to better understand it, to lump them together. But when it comes to politics, religion is meaningless. So although Pakistan is Muslim and Iran is Muslim, they're not going to be bonded together because of their common religion, although they're different sects. But I think everybody's beginning to feel this insecurity of having been aligned with the United States and then being abandoned. I mean, America has proven to the world that you can never rely on me. I mean, the Shah of Iran, there was no closer person to the you see the way Saudi Arabia is today. That's how the Shah used to be. So the Shah left, but the people are still in Iran. The people are the same people. And yet the United States is being so aggressive against them. So the Pakistani people, I mean, let's put aside the politicians even, the people know that you cannot rely on America to be your benefactor, your protector, and your friend. So being that it's still a democracy, if the Pakistani leadership ever takes a step to against Iran, the people, I'm sure, would not stand for it. But that said, I think Pakistan, I mean, Imran Khan, before coming to the White House, he went to Iran and met with the Iranian leadership. So it may well be that they meet. I mean, leaders are supposed to meet and they're supposed to talk. But I doubt very much that Pakistan would ever take steps against Iran.
Mike?
Yeah, I'd like to stay on the issue of the NPT. And the fundamental agreement is that the non-nuclear states, those that don't possess nuclear weapons, shall refrain from getting them in exchange for the nuclear powers being on a path to disarmament. I'm wondering, during the negotiations, the JCPOA negotiations, did Iran try to make that an issue? Did they try to tell the United States, you are not upholding your end of the NPT? And if so, if you know, how did the United States react?
Did you,
That's an excellent question, because the Article 6 you refer to, that the United, or those nuclear powers would get rid of their nuclear weapons, is very, very important, and it's the height of hypocrisy. But I admit to you, I was never so disgusted as I was during the making of that, negotiating of that nuclear deal. My number one concern was that it was in violation of international law and the NPT itself. I mean, international law is only good if it's applied uniformly to all nations. And the very preamble of this deal they made with Iran was, this deal only applies to you. And there was never anything said about the United States. And we know that they're constantly upping their nukes, making them smarter, even smaller, so they can use them more often. And Iranians, the Iranian negotiators, I mean, the foreign minister, he's studied international law here in America. He should have known better. But to my knowledge, none of that was negotiated. So it was a very, very bad deal for Iran. It was a very bad deal for American law, for international law, and it was a great deal for America. And it boggles my mind that Donald Trump withdrew from it.
yes.
There's a lot of controversy going on right now with Epstein, who was running a sex trafficking pedophile ring, and Trump had ties to him, Clinton had ties to him, and also Southern New York is going after him for tax evasion. And Trump's only way out might be to become a dictator and continue being a president so he can't be indicted on all of these crimes. And a lot of people think he's fearful. That's why he's so aggressive, and he's trying to talk not about policy, but the squad and racism and everything. So how do you feel? Like maybe attacking Iran would let him have martial law, and who knows how far he would take it.
Well, he certainly has his targets. I mean, he wants to attack Venezuela. He wants regime change there. The United States decide who should be the president of Venezuela. So he has Venezuela in his sights. He's messing with the Chinese in the South China Sea. He's messing with the Russians. He's messing with the Iranians. And I call Donald Trump the distractor in chief. But to be honest with you, I don't believe Donald Trump makes policies any more than President Obama did. It is not the presidents that formulate U.S. foreign policy, they implement them. And it's basically the think tanks and the very powerful lobby groups, various lobby groups, that come up with these policies. And the people that work in a given White House, they get like recycled into think tanks, and then they come back to the White House. So this is policies are formulated. I don't think Donald Trump, maybe as a businessman he's intelligent. I doubt that, because he would be proud to show his taxes. I have no idea. But he doesn't have the intellect to be a world leader. He doesn't have the knowledge to be a world leader, and he doesn't have the personality. So he does make a lot of waves. He does distract people from his own shortcomings. But while he's doing that, policies are being continued. I mean, how many times has he been saying, I like Putin, he's a good guy, this and that and the other, and yet behind the scenes sanctions are being imposed on Russia. Russia is being basically surrounded by NATO forces. So I don't know what Trump, I think, is too busy watching Fox News, and then the rest of the time they tell him this is what you should be saying. And Epstein is definitely very important. I don't know if you're familiar with Philip Giraldi. He's a former CIA operative who's very active. He had an article on Epstein, and he thought he was a Mossad agent, and that he got a lot of material on Clinton and Trump and whatever, and they blackmailed them. So that's a possibility, but I don't think that Epstein or Donald Trump or Bill Clinton or those people reflect the core values of the American people. I know that's a hard sell these days because we see a great deal of racism, and without the support, Trump wouldn't be there. So it exists a lot in America, unfortunately. Um, but but still, those are not the values that attracted me to this country. Those are not the reasons why I became an American citizen. I became an American citizen actually after 9/11 because I wanted to work with the FBI. I met Adam Schiff at a college, and I wanted to offer my services. And I had an Australian passport aside from my Iranian one. And the FBI said, we can't have you work for us until you're a US citizen. So it was based on that I decided to become a US citizen. I had a green card. I was a permanent resident. I was legal. but but after I became a citizen and I went to college and I learned some more, I mean, I was taking baby steps in learning about US foreign policy. Then I didn't want to work with the FBI or any governmental agency at that point.
So, Soraya, I just want to remember, I had a very, very interesting background, and it's in the newsletter on the front page here. So if you're interested in looking at it, it's very interesting. Okay, Todd?
Two questions, try to make it as quick as possible. But in regard to Epstein, and I know Phil Giraldi and friends with him, of course, I communicate with him every day. But Epstein helped fund Ehud Barak's company in Israel, which is an intelligence firm. And amongst the board of directors, so Epstein takes his billions or millions, lends it to Ehud and helps fund this company. So Epstein is part of this intelligence company in Israel, which ipso facto makes him connected to Mossad. But one of the board members on there is a former deputy commander of an elite IDF operations unit, former commander of IDF 8200, a cyber intelligence firm. I mean, Epstein's got his feet so deep into Israeli intelligence that it, but American newspapers don't cover that at all. I get all my news off of Haaretz.
Right.
Wondering if
Haaretz.
I'm apologizing for my R's. You know that newspaper. But they're more honest. And here's a frustrating thing here in the United States is especially the Democratic Party and people on the left, they've been so conditioned to believe in the fetishization of Trump as Putin's puppet, et cetera, et cetera. And so they completely ignore, been misdirected, redirected, and avert their eyes from looking at the connection that Trump has with Israel and Netanyahu, whom Trump trumpeted that he would be the best friend Israel ever had, and Netanyahu retorts that we're going to name a city after you. So how much notice is being taken of this in Iran? That Trump and Netanyahu are fellow fascists. I mean, Netanyahu has a family history of fascism going back, to the Likud party, back to Begin, back to the 1930s. And America has become a facsimile of that form of democratic fascism, because that's what Jabotinsky really created, a form of democratic fascism. So we have the elections every 4 years, right. But John Bolin says it's merely a inverted totalitarianism. So that's a comment I'm asking for. One other is, are there surreptitious operations going on waged by the United States into Iran now, besides spies? Of course we do that, but it's the American way of war to condition the battlefield through sabotage, etc., as we did in Vietnam and as we do with all of our wars. And anything of that is going on.
I think the biggest threat that I perceive from Americans' malaligned activities inside Iran is the brainwashing of the Iranian people. I mean, look at how we in America, in this country, we're brainwashed. And so there is a certain group of Iranians, they're the minority, but they get their news from American satellites, from American television station, or those funded by America. And they buy into all the lies. And that to me is a far bigger danger than anything else. And another thing that, again, this goes to internet and technology. Another thing that's very frightening is this happened in the world in 1999. Was it 99? Um, um, I don't know, a convention, when there was a lot of unrest, there was a lot of protest. And what RAND Research and Development, which is a governmental organization, they did a research that they can get people to gather together and protest using technology, radio, sending a message without having a leader. So whenever I see protests somewhere, and we never get them in America, whenever we get protests somewhere in some country, like there is now in Hong Kong, I always think of RAND, and what they did was they call it actually, what is it? The bee buzzing technology that they've taken after the bees, that you can transmit information to them, like say by text, and gather all here at such hour and protest. And that's been going on a lot lately, and America is very good at that. I don't know if it's America on its own or America together with Israel doing this, because they work very closely together. So I feel that more. But to your question, whether they know about the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu, I think it's no secret. Iranians know full well that America, it takes a lot of its direction when it comes to foreign policy from Israel. And this is not Trump alone. Like Bill Clinton, again, may go back to the Epstein era, I don't know. But one of the worst sanctions against Iran was underwritten by AIPAC, American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, and it was underwritten by them in 1996, and it was called the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act. It's not the Iran Sanctions Act. So they know America, America puts Israel first, then America. And that's why when they sent a message to Iran, to the supreme leader, Mr. Khamenei, through Shinzo Abe to go and talk to him, Khamenei said, why would I want to talk to him? He knows that Trump is not the boss. So it's very, they're very clear on what's going on here.
Yes.
Do you think it's possible that Europe will live up to its obligations under the JCPOA, or will they continue just submitting to U.S. sanctions, secondary sanctions?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that too well. It echoed a bit.
Will Europe live up to the JCPOA? JCPOA, or not?
Definitely not. This is something that I predicted over a year ago. They had 15 months to work on this, and they haven't been able to come up with anything substantial. And they actually turn around and say, well, we don't want our companies to be subjected to American sanctions. But Europe is definitely fearful of standing up against America. I mean, the European Union is not compiled of European nations. It's just a consumer market. It's the state of consumers. And America has a very handsome leverage and basically controls their finances. And I think if Europe needs to become independent first before it can do anything else or make any treaties or anything with any other countries. So they will not live up to it. And even let's say they got this Instex thing working, the way to pay for humanitarian goods and food and what have you, which is what it's all about. It's outrageous that after 2-3 years of having kept up with this deal, the Iran deal, on the Iranian side, even after a year and a half after America pulled out, that Iran should now be selling oil for food, which is what happened to Iraq. Because all it does is, okay, you can get medicine and you can only buy it from us, and you can do it by bartering your oil. Now, Iran would be truly foolish to accept that. And I think Europe is afraid of anything happening in the Strait of Hormuz because it gets basically most of his oil from there. So they're trying to buy time. I think a lot of people on this planet are trying to buy time, thinking that Donald Trump will not be the next president. But I think you can't bet on the future of a planet, of our world, based on somebody not getting reelected.
Yeah, okay, yes.
I wonder what you think of Trita Parsi's analysis. He wrote a book called Losing an Enemy, where he described President Obama's process of getting the agreement with Iran. And it really raised my esteem for Obama and for John Kerry, who were involved with that. And he was very worried about Netanyahu. Really, Trita Parsi treats him, he comes across as really a madman, and it was the Mossad that kept Netanyahu in check, according to him. Anyway, I'm just curious what you think.
I think this keeping Netanyahu in check is always going to be difficult, but not because the deal was bad. As long as, so far, Netanyahu, anytime he wants to do something, like today, they went and destroyed so many homes in Jerusalem. So what he does is, the minute he has this habit of saying, look, Iranians have got a bomb, they're going to kill us, they're going to kill all the Jews, blah, blah, blah. So they distract the world population with the ills that Iran wants to do, while they carry on their own, I call it genocide. The Palestinians are disappearing. And so this is what Netanyahu is all about. As far as Obama is concerned, I think Obama was a very, very, very clever man. He was in, before he became president, he was elected. He promised Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel to AIPAC. He said it. So, and he said, I'm going to negotiate with Iran and have them basically accept what I want them to accept. And if they decline, then I can show the whole world that they're the problem. I can show the people of Iran that the government is responsible for their isolation, and then hit them with more sanctions. So Obama's plan for Obama was a win-win regardless. And Trita Parsi had a huge role in this. And Trita Parsi is not, he's a Swedish Iranian guy. He received funding from National Endowment for Democracy for 3 years, which is the political arm of the CIA. I mean, National Endowment for Democracy says we do openly what the CIA used to do covertly. So Trita worked with the CIA. He took money from them. And his path is, or his thinking is, he's the one who pushed for targeted sanctions against Iran. He pushed for more propaganda into Iran. So his thinking is that it's better to have a regime change through negotiations than to have a war. Not that, so, I mean, one can admire that stand or one can dislike it. I dislike any kind of interference in another country. I think we've done, how many coups has America undertaken and how many successes can we account? So, so there I differ with Trita. It's a matter of tactic. I mean, you find that the Democrats are better at negotiations than the Republicans, but basically the end goal, the end plan is the same. And it's never changed. The end plan has been for the past 40 years to get rid of the government in Iran, the Islamic regime. When the Shah was leaving Iran, my stepfather was very, very close to him. He was his ghostwriter. He wrote his books, he wrote his speeches. Now that I know what American Express is, I said my stepfather was the Shah's American Express. He would never leave home without my stepfather. When the Shah left, we left the same day, and we were told to pack for 3 months. I mean, if you had seen our house, it's really eerie when you think about it. I mean, the lights, the bills were there, the carpet, everything was there. Our clothes were there in the closet. And we just left thinking we're going to go back after 3 months. And they tried a couple of coups and they didn't work, and the government stayed. But you know, the U.S. has been trying to get rid of the government for 40 years. So Trita's way is, or I shouldn't say Trita's way, but the way that is suggested through colored revolutions like 2009 was, or through negotiations. Because if you listen to Susan Meloni, she's with Brookings Institute, she's a brilliant woman. She's very clever. The whole idea of this deal was to build up the expectations of the Iranian people, because everybody thought all sanctions are going to go. I went there after the deal. I mean, the hotels that were going up, foreign companies coming in, everybody was joyful and thinking life is going to be different. The expectations were built and suddenly they were let go. Nothing happened and things became even worse than before. And that was yet another way of creating more unrest in Iran. And the plan was, I mean, I can happily provide you with this link through Mary again. Susan Meloni says, well, the plan was for Hillary Clinton to get elected, or the hope was. And so they would renegotiate this deal and take away the ballistic missiles and everything else from Iran once the expectations had been built up and down again. So they want, you know, so it was never a plan to have good relations with Iran, for them to become friends. I don't think Netanyahu was ever concerned about that. Netanyahu was just very concerned he didn't have a distraction for the crimes he was committing. But the plan was always to have a Washington-friendly regime in Iran.
Bridget,
Well, I've heard a lot of people say that, you know, oh, it's all about oil. Now that sounds simplistic and naive, and it's avoiding so many other things that it also is, that it's like we should forget about that line, you know, and you say something else. I mean, it's kind of like when I hear it, I want to just say, oh, you don't know everything, or, you know, I don't know how to get around that. It's not just about oil, and maybe we shouldn't think like that anymore. I don't know. It's more than that, isn't it?
I agree with you 100%. My own personal focus has always been, since 2005, it's been the one source we cannot live without, and that's water. I think water is far more important than oil, and maybe 100 years ago we would fight wars over oil. But if you consider the amount of money the American government, Pentagon, is spending on its wars, on its military bases, there are 120 military bases around Iran. If you think of the money that's being spent, if we didn't have those bases, if we didn't spend the money on our military to safeguard the oil would be so much cheaper. So that's not a logical answer anymore. There was a time when oil was very important for a nation to grow, and to get rich and to become affluent, like the British did. But I don't think oil is the primary reason anymore. Certainly it's important, but it's not the primary reason. I think America would very much like to be a global hegemon and to control everything. And it's pretty much what happened with the Roman empires. I mean, once you expand too much, you have too many bases, you can't maintain it. It's become so expensive for America to maintain its military power. You know, that's why a lot of you see a lack of infrastructure. You have all this incredible debt. Whereas if an upcoming nation, let's say even not Iran, somebody like Japan that does well financially, if they want to catch up, they don't have the expenditure of maintaining what they already have. China doesn't have the expenditure of America. America has so much military that on the one hand, it has to spend a lot of money maintaining what it has. On the other hand, it has to spend a lot of money building up, so it's always superior to the rest. Like China for now, which is a big competition, says, I don't need to maintain all that. I can use that money and beat you at what you have. So I think America, unfortunately, is on the decline. And it thinks that the answer to its decline is by building more weapons, having more nukes, having more battleships. And I think the population is neglected. And it's always the people of the country that make the country. I don't think, I mean, you can have all the tanks and battleships in the world, but if you don't have a person that has the heart of it, that wants to fight for that piece of land, then who cares how many battleships you have? I mean, America's losing the people, the American people losing faith in their government. I mean, look at you in this room. How many of you read foreign news media versus your own? I mean, we've come to a point where even when we hear about the Russians, it's quite possible that the Russians had a hand. I don't know. I doubt it. But we refuse to believe our own government. We'd rather believe somebody else. That's how America's lost credibility, not only at home, but overseas. And if you listen to the news media, the lies are getting more pathetic and more transparent by the day, which is an insult to our collective intelligence. Sorry, but the answer is I don't think it's just oil.
Redacted, yes.
Yeah, a couple of points. One, the United States has been going beyond sanctions and actually doing military embargoes. In the case of Syria, they're targeting oil that's being transported within Syria. Syrian oil is going, from place to place, and this seizure of the Grace 1 is an example. Was supposedly going to Syria. Now, sanctions apply to the countries or to the citizens and corporations that are chartered by a particular country that's imposing the sanctions, and they can use their leverage to extend that. But the United States is actually going a step further, and they're using Britain to try to. They're using Britain as a cat's paw in this case to start militarily imposing sanctions on the export of Iranian oil.
Did you say a question? Your question?
And well, there's another thing that happened before the JCPOA, which was the Iran and the United States had joint military operations against ISIS and under Iranian command in Iraq. And kind of as a side agreement, the Iranians, agreed to have the U.S. in command, and I think that military collaboration ended, by 2015. But that's something that people a lot of times don't realize is going on.
So you just had a comment or a question?
Well, if you wanted to respond to those comments.
I honestly don't believe that a U.S. commander would ever, or U.S. military person would ever agree to serve under the command of an Iranian, and there's no Iranian that were willing to serve under the command of an American in Iraq or elsewhere. They did both fight ISIS, absolutely, and they were aware of that. They were aware of each other's presence, and they did cooperate in fighting ISIS. But what Mr. Trump did was he called the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which are the people that were fighting ISIS, terrorists. So Iran had to reciprocate. That's what politics is. So now if an Iranian sees an American in Iraq or Syria, considers him a terrorist, can kill him. And America can do the same. And this is where this is very dangerous. So yes, the previous administration was far more clever. They had better foresight. But I think the Trump administration has John Bolton and Pompeo buzzing in his ears. So I think I fear for the world. Like the tanker you mentioned, it was not under what Britain did was not under the EU jurisdiction. And the tanker, it was an Iranian oil tanker, and Britain says they confiscated it because it was taking oil to Syria. Well, that was illegal. They had no right to do that. But what is very interesting is if you read in all the newspapers that you may even, whether it's our own newspaper in America or foreign media or, non-mainstream media, ISIS was selling Syrian oil to Europe through Turkey. And they didn't hesitate about buying oil from these terrorists because it was cheap. but a company that was sending its tankers to take oil wherever it was going, the destination, they stopped it. That was piracy, and Iran called it as such. And that's how the British got their wealth, actually, in the 1800s, if not before. They actually allowed piracy, and a lot of the wealth of the Commonwealth comes from piracy. So maybe they're resorting to their old ways. Maybe they're afraid of Brexit and need the money. I don't know.
Dennis?
Thank you. So along the way, you've mentioned Saudi Arabia a time or two, and I think a significant piece in the jigsaw puzzle that is the Middle East. And it would be enlightening to hear your perspective on Saudi and U.S. relations.
It's very hard to know what the relationship is. I mean, I think for the longest time, the United States relied on Saudi Arabia for its cheap oil. I think last time we had a talk with VAM, I mentioned that when Iran was having its revolution and stopped its oil production, Saudi Arabia stepped in and made up for that oil, but it did threaten America at that time. So Saudi Arabia has always been like a gas station for America, and America does with Saudi Arabia what it did with Iran pre-revolution. They recycled the petrodollars by selling them arms. And they basically, the Saudis do America's bidding. They started the fight in Yemen, and they're stuck there. They don't know how to handle it. And what's very telling is Donald Trump, in his book, which was out when he was running for office, he called the Saudis the most state sponsors of terrorism. And here he is selling them weapons. In effect, if you pay attention to it, that means the president of the United States of America is selling weapons to terrorists, and nobody's bringing that up. So I have a theory. I don't have anything to back it up with, but I have a theory that, well, we know there's been a lot of talk about Saudi Arabia running out of oil. And there's been even articles in Bloomberg and what have you, that Saudi Arabia doesn't have as much oil as once thought. And that there was really a palace coup, like this MBS guy, Mohammed bin Salman. There was a coup, and he's siding with America against the interests of Saudi Arabia. And and Trump is playing that. I mean, Trump is going along with that, using him. But I don't know where it's all going to end. If Saudi is without oil, and one of the very interesting things about this whole tanker issue, not the British tanker, but going back a month or two ago when the tankers were first said to have been attacked by Iran, America passed this bill called NOPEC. NOPEC means no to OPEC. OPEC stands for all producing and exporting countries, which is Saudi Arabia, Iran, United Arab Emirates, all those countries. And America had wanted to put a stop to their power, meaning that, I mean, they could get together, these OPEC people, and decide how much oil they want to produce and what price to sell it at. And America felt this was against its interest, passed a bill that anybody that did this would be subjected to Americans' laws and they would be punished. So basically, America was projecting its power on other countries and telling them that they have to abide by American laws. This happened in February. So there was a call from Saudi Arabia to Wall Street. When I say a call, I mean a signal, saying that the markets would feel this if that bill were to go through and if it got signed into law. And United Arab Emirates turned around and said this would be the end of OPEC and we can't stand it. And it would really seriously harm shale oil production here in America too. So when Trump announced that it's putting a complete stop to the export of Iranian oil, and he said Saudi Arabia would make up for it because of this bill, because of NOPEC, Saudi Arabia said, no, we're not in a hurry to increase it. And United Arab Emirates pulled back. And then, lo and behold, you have tankers that get damaged in the region, in the Persian Gulf. And immediately after that, although United Arab Emirates refused to put the blame on Iran, Saudi Arabia said, yes, it was Iran, and they said they would produce more oil to compensate for the loss of Iranian oil. So there's a lot more behind the scenes going on about these tankers and what's going on with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates than what we might hear here in the West or read in the newspaper. But I don't think Saudi Arabia will have a long-lasting relationship with America. I mean, America is using it because they acknowledge Israel. The most important, I mean, you know, it's not me saying, they're very, very prominent professors and researchers like Walt and Mearsheimer, who've said that America takes a backseat to the policies of Israel's policies come first. Israel determines U.S. foreign policy. So Saudi Arabia, because it acknowledges Israel and is working with Israel, did the United Arab Emirates against Iran. For now, they're safe. And Trump praises them. But this is not going to be a long-term thing. I read 2 days ago that the ambassador, UN ambassador, Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United Nations, said it's time we pulled out of Yemen because we don't want to fight the Iranians in Yemen or anywhere else. So, you know, there's some very interesting undercurrents. There's some very interesting things going on. And the problem is there might suddenly be a spark that may really endanger us all. But I think America is losing allies, even allies that it controlled, like Saudi Arabia. And basically Saudi Arabia without its oil is useless to America. I mean, what does America want from Saudi if not their oil and to sell them weapons we no longer use?
Big military base.
Yeah, the military base, they're going back in there. In fact, it's interesting you should say that because in 2003, Saudi Arabia basically funded the war in the sense that they said if we attack Iraq, there'll be a hike in the price of oil, and Saudi Arabia assured George W. Bush that they would cover the cost of it, they would produce more oil. But the one condition they had was for the U.S. Military to remove its bases from Saudi Arabia and take it to Iraq. And look at it now. I mean, they're out of Iraq and they're gradually going back to Saudi Arabia again. So, you know, it's desert land. It's not, it's a piece of real estate, but it's not a nation state. It's not something, it's not like United States would always rely on Britain as an ally, although they might be falling apart right now for various reasons. But it's not a nation state the United States would rely on. It's a piece of property and some, you know, keepers that America uses to further its own agenda. And it's mind-boggling the Saudis don't see it. I mean, if I sit here and I read it in several magazines and they were punished for this, United States military in 2012, some officers were being taught, these are future leaders of this country, that were being taught that we've got to reduce Islam to a cult and if starve Muslims, and then we have to drop a bomb on Mecca and Medina. Those are the places in Saudi Arabia. And then that army officer was discharged. But this was all over many newspapers. And if Saudi Arabia doesn't wake up to this ugly reality that they're so dispensable and they still do the bidding, then, I mean, would you want a friend like that? I don't think you would consider them a friend. So if that's the kind of relationship they have, like a slave and a master.
Thank you.
Okay, one more question, Colleen.
Well, I just wanted, Soraya, you're 100% right tonight. You've just been spot on from everything I read, at least. I just wanted to piggyback on Dennis's thing with this propaganda that Iranians are terrorists, and a couple of the main things. I mean, these things are incredibly huge that started this myth that Iran is the source of the worst terrorism. One actually is 9/11, where a stupid federal judge held Iran responsible for 9/11. If you read anything about Iran, it's the enemy of Al Qaeda. I mean, 15 of the 19 were Saudis. I mean, it's so far-fetched. And yet a federal judge, there's a court case that says Iran helped facilitate somebody traveled through Iran or something, so they're responsible. Another case, which actually impacts Minnesota,
was the bombing of Khobar Towers in the mid-90s. And this bombing was probably, by all accounts, by Al-Qaeda, because the people, going back to this distinction between the stupid rulers of Saudi Arabia that are making these deals with the United States, and they were housing the base there, but the people and that got entranced with Al-Qaeda were the ones who bombed Khobar Towers. The entire FBI, who went over there a couple of times and let Saudi Arabia run the investigation, and Louis Freeh, who is a Mech supporter, doesn't give, he gets tens of thousands and maybe more dollars from the group that's opposing Iran. He indicted Iranians on his last day in office. I mean, it's the most specious case in the world. But I had to tell the family who lost their son in Minnesota lies for 2 or 3 years, and about these Iranians, etc. And the truth is, it was probably, our enemy, Al-Qaeda, all along. And so that's those are just two of the big things that give rise to this propaganda that Iran is. Of course, then you have you have the actual the coup itself. I mean, the Islamic Revolution itself, which is another one, holding the hostages, etc. But those two things are recent, and you will hear this day in and day out on our. I just want to mention one more thing about nuclear bombs. One of the problems right now, I want your comment on this, is that when people say our military did many of game theory things and found out that you're right, the Strait of Hormuz and all these problems. And that was maybe one of the reasons why they, after Iraq, did not, our military, some of the military Joint Chiefs of Staff were not eager to attack Iran for this reason. Now you hear a different thing, and you hear, oh, it's going to be easy. You're hearing that it's going to be easy. And I think I've seen a little bit of stuff that they are planning to use one of these small nukes. Now, it's going to be close to Israel. That's the thing. I mean, if the winds are the wrong direction, etc. But I do think that's in the cards, in the planning of the Pentagon for use of maybe some smaller nukes, because they don't want another Vietnam or another Iraq, whatever. And you almost see this with Trump. He's been told, he's dumb as whatever, but he's been told that if we nuke them, we will not have this long-standing like Iraq and whatever. And I want your comment on what you think about that.
I think anything is possible. I mean, one always does fear that. But I think there's, again, I don't have knowledge of Iran's military, but I do listen to this think tank. And I would say, even knowing that I would be talking with you, I was hoping that they would translate it into English, because it's too long, it's very complicated. He breaks down all this game theory and what it would cost to attack Iran and what have you. I mean, Iranians, whether they will or it's a bluff or they can do it, I can't be certain. But they have measures in place where even if a nuke were to be dropped somewhere, they would be able to retaliate immediately. And I think the first target is, I'm sure it would be Strait of Hormuz would be finished for a long time. It would be closed, and that would devastate world economy. You're talking like about $400, $500 a barrel of oil. They would drop bombs on, because they've said anything that happens to Iran, Israel would be the first to pay the price as well, because they know that Israel dictates a lot of U.S. foreign policies. And, you've got to think of your commander-in-chief as a traitor if he's going to use a nuke on Iran, and yet he sends more soldiers to the region to become targets, because they would be killed immediately. Iran is more than capable. They're sending 5,000 soldiers to Saudi Arabia. Iran is more than capable of harming Saudi Arabia to the point where they would go back to living in tents. And if you have 5,000 additional American soldiers there, then if that is his plan to use nukes, then he's sending them deliberately in harm's way. How's that acceptable?
Not acceptable. I'm just there's a difference between reality and being acceptable. And it's possible Trita Parsi because he wants, the United States to he wants the revolution in Iran, etc. However, he may have a bottom line that he does not want this terrible destruction to take place. And that might be a reason why he's the director now of this new think tank with the Koch brothers and Soros.
And Soros.
That's a possibility. Because they just realized that there are some real Dr. Strangelove people in power, Bolton, number one, and these people aren't especially realistic. They're not even pragmatic.
That is, yes, he's definitely into regime change. It's just mind-boggling that a kid from Sweden who is not even an American citizen, who's been living there, is able to get so far up high. But what is interesting about his part in the Iran deal, which is something I wrote about the day after the Iran deal, and I called my piece The Day After. One of the fears was that America and Israel had always talked about dropping bombs or nuking Iran's nuclear reactor. And one of the things that scared the international community, the scientists, the doctors, the physicians for social responsibility was because there was so much enriched uranium in that reactor. If a bomb were dropped on it, the first day, 3 million people would die as a result of the bomb destroying the reactor and the nuclear enriched uranium getting out and what have you. Then it would progress, and depending on the direction of the wind, it would go to Pakistan, it would go to India and other countries. So that was the biggest obstacles to bombing Iran before the deal. The deal, in effect, removed all the nuclear material out of the reactor. And that's been one of the issues that's really troubled me. It was a devilishly clever deal. So now, and they put the cap at 3 because they went from 40,000 kilograms of enriched uranium to under 300. So the fallout from less than 300 kilograms of enriched uranium would not kill millions of people, but it would destroy, so again, so I don't know if Trita Parsi had a beef with Iran because his parents were put in jail after the revolution. So, if sometimes personal things make you react in ways that that plan your future. I mean, I had a lot of stuff taken from me because of the revolution. Because of my family's affiliation with the Shah. And for the longest time, I hated them. I cannot describe to you the passion with which I hated the Islamic Republic. And then when I went back to school, I learned about the coup d'etat and the role that America had played in it. And then I wanted to think to myself and understand why it was that people embraced the revolution. Why did they want a revolution? And then I started remembering things from when I was a kid. At the time, it may have been, it didn't matter to you that, somebody was put into jail by the Shah's notorious Savak, his secret police. At the time, I kept hearing it, but, they're in jail. And then later, I learned more and more and more. And the things that had taken shape throughout my growing up, the reality of them became so ugly to me after I fathomed it that my hatred of the Islamic Republic went away, and I understood it, and I understood a lot of things they do. It may not be a place that I would want to live because this is me. I mean, I was raised in a Christian school, and I'm very secular, and I'm probably a lot more comfortable speaking English most of the time. My husband is an American. But I can't say they have to be like me because I'm not like them. So I can't impose my values on other people, and I can't make judgments about Iran and how policies should be followed based on my hatred of what happened to me personally. And I think that's where you always can, you can't go right, you can't think right if you think with hatred. You lose logic.
So on that note, thank you. We're all going to sign these postcards. Thank you.
honestly, I feel this, I mean, I always tell, Mary, I just feel so blessed to know you all and to know that in my fight, I may be very, very far away from you, but I'm not alone. And so it gives me so much strength and so much courage, and it keeps me going. So I hope one of these days I can be sitting amongst you guys and we can all talk that way. So it's like,
We'll keep that in mind. And thank you so much. You can see the audience really appreciates you. I got a lot of good information. If anyone wants links to material that Soraya mentioned, let me know and I will be happy to send them to you.
Because her knowledge is just incredible. Soraya,
Knowledge is incredible.
Thank you so much.
my pleasure. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Can I just,
Thank you.
can I just say that your knowledge is just wonderful? It's a lot of the things I think I know, I don't.
Well, we always learn from each other. So thank you very much for hearing me, and I hope I hear from you. And if there's anything that you want to ask links, I'm glad to provide them. If you have any questions, if I don't know the answer, I'll look it up. I am a researcher, so I'll look it up.